For decades, fans of Lost in Space thought they knew the story behind the Robinson family. But the real mystery may have been hiding in plain sight, not on the alien planets, but behind the actors who brought the show to life. Some cast members later revealed surprising details about the series, its strange production choices, and what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. And one of the biggest fan theories about the show may have been built on something the cast themselves never intended. By the end, the familiar faces of Lost in Space may look very different. Before the Robinson family ever stepped into that famous Jupiter 2, Lost in Space was meant to be something much darker. The idea came from the classic novel The Swiss Family Robinson, but the television version was shaped by a very different dream: serious space adventure. The early plans focused on danger, survival, and the unknown. There would be strange worlds, hard choices, and real fear about what might be waiting beyond Earth. Then something changed. The people making the show realized they were not simply building another science fiction series. They were competing for a place in a growing television market where space adventures were becoming more popular. And that meant Lost in Space had to stand out. The biggest change was not the spaceship, it was the tone. Instead of keeping the story completely serious, the show began mixing danger with comedy, bright costumes, strange creatures, and larger-than-life characters. The Robinson family remained at the center, but Dr. Zachary Smith slowly became something much bigger than the creators first expected. That change would shape almost everything that followed. The cast had to perform scenes where a family was fighting to survive one moment, then dealing with a strange comic situation the next. For actors, that could be a strange balance. They were making a science fiction adventure, but the rules of that world were constantly changing. And there was another problem hiding underneath it all. Television production in the 1960s was demanding. Sets had to be reused. Costumes had to be changed quickly. Special effects were limited compared with what audiences see today. Yet viewers were expected to believe that these actors were traveling through distant planets and meeting impossible creatures. Somehow, they had to make it feel real. But while the Robinson family was supposed to be the heart of the story, another character was quietly taking control of the show: Dr. Smith. At first, he was meant to create danger. Instead, he became one of the biggest reasons audiences kept watching. And that raised a question nobody could ignore. How did the show's villain become one of its most important characters? On screen, the cast of Lost in Space often looked like one strange but happy family. But filming the show was not nearly as easy as it looked. The actors were working inside a television machine that moved fast, reused sets, and demanded new stories week after week. The Jupiter 2 itself was a major part of that challenge. The ship had to look like a real spacecraft from different angles, while still leaving room for cameras and actors. Many scenes were filmed on constructed sets rather than inside a complete ship. The audience saw a finished world. The cast saw walls, lights, cameras, and equipment just outside the frame. Then came the planets. One week, an actor might be surrounded by futuristic machinery. The next, the same studio space could become an alien world. Strange costumes and creatures helped sell the illusion. But the actors had to take those unusual surroundings seriously. And that was not always easy. Bill Mumy, who played Will Robinson, was still a child when the series began. He had already worked in television, but Lost in Space placed him in a much bigger spotlight. He had to remember lines, work long hours, and perform alongside experienced adults while also playing a young boy caught in an impossible situation. But Will had another challenge. He was often paired with a robot. That meant Mumy was frequently reacting to a machine that was actually a performer inside a costume. The audience saw a talking robot. The actors had to imagine the same thing while cameras rolled around them. Yet, the hardest part may have been something much simpler: keeping the story believable when the show itself was becoming increasingly strange. As the series moved forward, the tone became lighter and more playful. The danger was still there, but comedy was becoming a major part of the formula. And one actor benefited from that change more than anyone else: Jonathan Harris. His Dr. Smith was supposed to be a threat to the Robinsons. Instead, Harris gave him a personality so memorable that the character began pulling attention away from almost everyone else. The strange part was that this did not happen by accident. Harris made choices that changed how audiences saw Smith. His voice, timing, expressions, and dramatic style turned a villain into something far more complicated and far more entertaining. Soon, the biggest question was no longer whether Dr. Smith would destroy the Robinson family. It was whether the show could continue without him dominating every scene. And that was about to change the entire series. When viewers first met Will Robinson, he looked like the youngest member of an ordinary family thrown into an extraordinary situation. But behind that young face was an actor already learning how strange fame could become. Bill Mumy was only 11 when Lost in Space premiered in 1965. He was not new to television. He had already appeared in major shows and had built a reputation as a talented child actor. But Will Robinson was different. This character placed him inside a huge science fiction adventure alongside adults who were already established performers. Suddenly, millions of people knew his face. That sounds like a dream for any young actor. But there was another side. Mumy was growing up while working in an industry where adults controlled nearly everything: schedules, scripts, sets, and publicity. At the same time, viewers were watching him grow up on screen. Every change in his voice, appearance, and performance happened in front of an audience. And then there was the robot. Their relationship became one of the show's most famous parts. Will was not simply another member of the Robinson family. He became the human center of the robot story, giving the machine something audiences could understand: friendship. That relationship helped create some of the show's most emotional moments. But it also created an unexpected problem for the rest of the cast. The younger Mumy and the robot were extremely popular with viewers. Their scenes could become the moments people remembered most. Meanwhile, the show's original family survival story was becoming less important. The shift was subtle at first. Then it became impossible to miss. Dr. Smith was becoming more comedic. The robot was becoming more expressive. Will was becoming a bigger part of the show's identity. The series was slowly moving away from the serious space adventure it had once promised. For Mumy, that meant growing up inside a show that was changing around him. Years later, he continued acting and became a musician and writer as well. But his connection to Will Robinson never disappeared. The character became part of television history and part of Mumy's own story. Yet, Will was not the only young performer whose career was changed by the series. The biggest surprise was waiting in the form of a character who was never supposed to become the audience's favorite. Dr. Smith. Dr. Zachary Smith entered Lost in Space as a threat. He was not supposed to be the character viewers loved most. His job was simple: create danger for the Robinson family and make their journey harder. But Jonathan Harris had other ideas. Harris was an experienced actor, and he understood something important about television. A villain did not have to be frightening every second. Sometimes, a character could become more interesting by being funny, dramatic, selfish, and completely unpredictable. So, Harris pushed Smith in that direction. His voice became theatrical. His reactions became larger. His timing became sharper. Instead of simply attacking the Robinsons, Smith could complain, panic, argue, or try to escape trouble in ridiculous ways. The result was unexpected. The villain became entertainment. As the series continued, Smith was no longer just an enemy. He became part of the show's comedy engine. His scenes with Will and the robot created a very different kind of conflict. The audience could laugh at him while still wondering whether he would cause trouble again. And that changed the balance of the entire show. The original story had been about a family lost in space. But now, viewers were also tuning in to see what Dr. Smith would do next. There was a strange irony in this. A character designed to threaten the heroes was helping keep the series alive. Jonathan Harris later became strongly associated with Smith, but he also understood the character as a performance. He reportedly cared deeply about the way Smith spoke and behaved, creating a style that was almost impossible to copy. That style became so powerful that it affected the show's direction. The more popular Smith became, the more room the character received. The serious danger of the early episodes slowly gave way to comedy and fantasy. The show was becoming something its creators had not originally planned. And then another character joined Smith at the center of the audience's attention. The robot. What began as a machine designed to help the Robinson family became something much stranger. It could warn them, argue with them, show emotion, and even become part of the comedy. But there was one detail many viewers never stopped to think about. Who was actually inside that famous robot? And how did the cast create a friendship with a machine that could not really move on its own? The answer reveals just how much of Lost in Space depended on performances that viewers could barely see. At first glance, Robot B9 looked like a machine built for one simple job: protect the Robinson family. But the character quickly became much more than that. In fact, the robot became one of the clearest signs that Lost in Space was changing. The robot was performed by Bob May, while Dick Tufeld provided its famous voice. That meant the character audiences loved was really the result of two performers working together. And that created a strange problem. Bob May had to act inside a bulky robot costume while having limited freedom to move. He could not simply walk around like a normal actor. His movements had to look mechanical, yet they also needed enough personality for viewers to believe there was a character inside the machine. That balance was important. If the robot moved too stiffly, it could feel like a prop. If it moved too naturally, the illusion could disappear. But the cast found a way to make it work. The robot's relationship with Will became especially important. Instead of being just a machine, it became Will's protector and companion. Their connection gave the series something emotional at a time when the stories were becoming more playful. Then came the voice. Dick Tufeld's delivery gave the robot a personality far beyond its metal body. The famous warning of danger became one of television's most recognizable sounds. But the robot was not always serious. It could also take part in jokes, arguments, and strange situations. That was a major clue about where the series was heading. The show was no longer trying to make every moment feel like hard science fiction. It was building a universe where a talking robot, an over-the-top villain, and a family of space explorers could exist together. For the actors, that meant constantly adjusting to the changing tone. And there was another hidden layer. Because the robot was physically demanding to perform, the people creating the character had to work around practical limits that modern viewers may never notice. Yet, those limitations became part of the magic. The robot was not realistic. It did not need to be. It needed to be memorable. And it was. But the robot and Dr. Smith were not the only reason the show survived its strange transformation. Behind the cameras, the cast was also developing relationships that helped hold the series together. Some of those relationships were warm. Others were complicated. And one question remained. Could the Robinson family still feel like a family while the show around them was becoming something completely different? The strangest thing about Lost in Space may not have been the aliens, the planets, or even the robot. It may have been how a group of very different actors managed to make the Robinson family feel believable while the stories around them became more and more unusual. At the center was Guy Williams as John Robinson and June Lockhart as Maureen Robinson. They had to sell the idea that these two adults were still the parents in charge, even when the story suddenly placed them beside talking machines, strange creatures, and Dr. Smith's latest disaster. Their calm family dynamic gave the show a foundation. Then there was Mark Goddard as Don West. Don was the pilot, the practical member of the group, and often the person who had to react when everything went wrong. Angela Cartwright played Penny, while Marta Kristen played Judy. Together with Bill Mumies, they gave the Robinson family different personalities rather than making them feel like copies of one another. That mattered. Because the show was becoming more comedic, the family needed actors who could play the danger seriously while still accepting the strange world around them. And that became one of the show's hidden strengths. The actors did not always have to agree with the tone of the episode. They simply had to make the characters believe in it. Imagine filming a scene where the family faces a terrifying alien threat. While everyone on set knows the creature is a costume, the planet is a studio set, and the camera crew is standing just outside the frame. The actors had to create the illusion, and sometimes that illusion came from their relationships with each other. June Lockhart later became strongly associated with Maureen Robinson, a character who represented stability and intelligence. Guy Williams brought a more serious presence to John. Their performances helped keep the family grounded, even when the stories became increasingly wild. But there was a growing problem. The original idea of Lost in Space was slowly disappearing. Dr. Smith was getting more attention. The robot was becoming a major attraction. Will Robinson was becoming a central figure. Comedy was taking over more of the story. For some viewers, this made the show more fun. For others, it made the series less like the serious space adventure they expected. And behind that change was a decision that would shape the show's reputation for decades. The question was no longer how to make Lost in Space more realistic. It was how far the creators were willing to go in the opposite direction. By the time Lost in Space moved deeper into its run, the show had become almost unrecognizable compared with its early promise. The first season still had moments of real danger. The Robinson family faced strange worlds, limited resources, and threats that made their situation feel serious. But the series soon discovered something television often rewards. Audiences loved the characters who made them laugh. And nobody did that better than Dr. Smith. Jonathan Harris turned Smith into a dramatic, funny, and often selfish character. The robot became more expressive. Will Robinson became increasingly important. The stories began to lean toward fantasy and comedy instead of strict science fiction survival. There was a reason for this shift. Television was a business, and the people making a series paid attention to what viewers responded to. If a certain character made an episode more entertaining, that character could receive more attention. So Lost in Space followed the audience. But that choice came with a cost. The original family-centered survival story became harder to find. Instead of asking, how will the Robinsons survive? Episodes could revolve around stranger questions. What ridiculous trouble will Dr. Smith cause? What strange creature will they meet? What will the robot do this time? For younger viewers, this could be exciting. For people who wanted serious science fiction, it could be frustrating. That split became part of the show's legacy. Some fans remember Lost in Space as a colorful adventure filled with imagination. Others remember it as a series that started with a strong science fiction idea and slowly became campier. Both memories can be true. The cast had to live through that change while performing it week after week. They could not simply freeze the show at the version they preferred. Television moved forward, scripts arrived, and the characters had to follow. And there was another consequence. The actors became closely linked to characters that were becoming larger than the show itself. For Bill Mumy, that meant Will Robinson followed him into adulthood. For Jonathan Harris, Dr. Smith became one of the roles people remembered most. For Bob, May, and Dick Tufeld, the robot became a piece of television history. But when the final episode ended in 1968, the question changed. What happens when actors spend years being known as someone else? Some moved on easily. Others carried the series with them for the rest of their careers. And their lives after Lost in Space revealed just how powerful and sometimes complicated that fame could become. When Lost in Space ended in 1968, the Robinson family did not simply disappear. The actors stepped out of the spaceship and back into a world where millions of viewers already knew their faces. But fame does not always follow the same path. For some cast members, the show became one chapter in a long career. For others, it became the role audiences remembered first. Bill Mumy continued acting after Lost in Space, appearing in many television and film projects. He also developed a career in music and writing. Yet decades later, people still knew him as Will Robinson. That was both a gift and a strange burden. A child actor can grow up, change careers, and build a completely different life. But audiences can keep seeing the child they remember. June Lockhart had a similar connection to television history. Before Lost in Space, she was already an established actress. After the series, she continued working in television, film, and other projects, proving that Maureen Robinson was only one part of a much longer career. Angela Cartwright and Marta Kristen also continued acting after the series, while Mark Goddard remained active in television and film. And then there was Jonathan Harris. Dr. Smith had become so closely connected to Harris that separating actor from character was nearly impossible for many fans. But Harris continued performing and working in other projects, including voice work. His career showed something important about television fame. Sometimes the role that makes you famous can also become the role people never stop asking about. Bob may face a different kind of recognition. Inside the robot costume, much of his physical performance was hidden from the audience. Yet fans remembered the character as if it were a real member of the Robinson family. His work helped prove that an actor does not need a visible face to create a memorable character. Dick Tuffel's voice became equally important. His delivery helped give the robot its identity, turning simple mechanical warnings into part of the show's emotional language. Then came the reunions, interviews, fan events, and renewed interest in the series. The actors were no longer simply people from an old television program. They had become part of science fiction history, and that created one final mystery. Why did a series that changed so much from its original idea survive in people's memories for generations? The answer is not simply nostalgia. Something deeper happened. The show accidentally created a group of characters that became more memorable than the story itself. And that brings us to the part most fans may never have noticed. The biggest secret of Lost in Space was never hidden in an alien planet or inside the Jupiter. It was hiding in the show's biggest mistake. The series began with the promise of serious space survival. A family was lost far from Earth, facing danger with limited help and no easy way home. But as the years passed, that serious idea slowly faded. Dr. Smith became funnier. The robot became more human. Will Robinson became one of the show's emotional centers. Strange creatures and wild adventures replaced much of the original danger. At first, that sounds like failure, but it may have been the reason the show survived. If Lost in Space had stayed exactly as it began, it might have been remembered as another 1960s science fiction series. Instead, it became something much harder to forget. It had characters people could recognize instantly. A worried young boy, a dramatic scientist, a powerful father, a smart and caring mother, a loyal pilot, and a robot whose voice became part of television history. The cast did not just perform these characters. Over time, they became connected to them in the public mind. That is why the series could remain popular even after its original audience had grown older. People were not only remembering the stories, they were remembering how the characters made them feel. Will and the robot represented friendship. The Robinson family represented survival. Dr. Smith represented chaos. And together, they created a strange balance that should not have worked, but somehow did. There is also a deeper lesson in what happened to the cast. Television does not always create legends by following the original plan. Sometimes a show becomes memorable because the actors bring something unexpected to it. A villain becomes comic. A machine becomes emotional. A child actor becomes the heart of the story. A serious adventure becomes campy, colorful, and strange. And decades later, those choices can become the very things fans love. That is the contradiction at the center of Lost in Space. The show drifted away from what it was supposed to be, and by doing that, it became something audiences never completely forgot. The actors gave the series its soul, but time gave it something else, a second life. What once looked like a strange 1960s television experiment eventually became a lasting part of science fiction culture. And perhaps that is the truth most fans never figured out. The Robinsons may have been lost in space, but the show found its way into television history.